everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Face of Esports on day 4 of Collegiate Rising Back to School. I'm Sarah Wagg, and I'll be your host for this panel. And with me, I have Christopher Michaels. Hi, Christopher.
Hi, I'm in Mexico City right now, so suddenly and unexpectedly.
That's always the way it is. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We're so excited to have you, and I, for one, am super excited to start picking your brain. We're going to be covering 3 main topics today. The first one being your career journey, because you've done it all. We'll move on to the current state of the esports industry and end off with pathways to success for advice to up-and-coming talent. Twitch chat, if you
Sounds
have any
great.
questions throughout the course of the panel to ask Christopher, please feel free to drop them into the chat. We'll be answering them at the end of our hour here with you all. Christopher, are you ready?
I'm very ready.
Very ready. Well, starting off with career journey then, I'd like to start by looking at your career history to lay the foundation for our hour together. Most viewers were introduced to you through your work with League of Legends and Overwatch, but may not know your entire career journey. What did your progression through the esports industry look like from when esports first piqued your interest all the way up until now?
Well, I started doing work in esports about 17 years ago. So I started in about 2004, this was when esports was really nothing in North America. There were some Counter-Strike events going on, but I was into the RTS scene. So I started in Warcraft 3, and I was a team manager for a team called Verge Gaming. And Verge also had a CS like 1.6 and then later Source team. But Freak, the League of Legends caster, was actually a player on this roster at the time. So he and I would also cast Warcraft 3 events. So ESL was running an online Warcraft 3 league, which was kind of the premier league in the world. So there were players from Korea, Europe, North America that were all competing in it. So I started there, and I started casting in Warcraft 3 for that league. And at the time, I would actually pay my own way in like 2005 to go to events in like New York, sleep on the floor of a hotel room of like the pro players, and then cast the events there. So I was doing events with like GGL or Radio ITG, which was DJ Wheat's broadcasting company at the time. And so I started doing that, and I kind of continued that for my first couple of years of college. And I took a break kind of my junior and senior year of college, was doing some other stuff, finishing up my school. And then after I graduated, a friend of mine was working at, I had done some other RTS games during this time too, in terms of casting. So I had done like Rise of Nations, Rise of Legends, Company of Heroes, this kind of stuff. So I was entirely RTS at the time. And then a friend of mine, a college roommate, ended up being one of the first like 50 or so employees at Riot. And so he invited me in 2009 to come stay at Riot for a week while the league was still in closed beta. And I started playing the game, and I really enjoyed it. And then when the esports scene started developing in like 2010, 2011, because of my previous experience, I started casting with MLG and operating my own tournaments through my kind of news and analysis website, GG Chronicle. And so we ran events with like TSM and CLG and all the major teams in 2011. So I was running my own events out of my apartment in Brooklyn. And then, then I was working with MLG, started doing MLG events, and interviewed and got invited to go to Korea to cast League at OGN. And I had grown up watching StarCraft Brood War on OGN. So it was like a dream job. So I was living in New York City, and they gave me 2 weeks to move to Korea at the end of 2012. So I just left. Just left.
That was the end of it, up and on your way to Korea.
Yeah, and then from there, I worked in League of Legends, Overwatch, Vainglory, StarCraft 2. I'm currently I'm in Mexico City right now because I'm hosting the Rainbow Six Mexico Major, which was very last minute, but I'm excited to do it. So we start that tomorrow. So I keep doing more and more things. Currently, I'm the commissioner of FlashPoint, so I help a lot with operating the league, doing creative design and direction, and tournament administration, basically everything. So
it's safe to say within your 17 years, you've done it all. And it sounds like a lot of the decisions were split decisions. Like you're in Mexico right now.
yeah.
When
Well,
these
you have to be flexible.
Yeah, I was going to say, it doesn't sound like you have very much time to make some of these decisions. So, how do you decide what the next step is going to be? Because some of these things just come knocking out of nowhere.
Well, sometimes I have to make decisions because I've made a developer very angry. So I have to move very quickly on to the next thing before they can enact vengeance. Um, so that, sometimes that's the reason.
Sometimes that's the
um,
way it is. But you've been very
so
flexible and you've moved all over the place. I mean, you've literally moved all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to go to Korea because I was very confident, given the history of esports, that the Korean League was going to be the best. And you have to remember, this was before Korea had ever won Worlds in League of Legends, but they had just launched the server over there, and you could kind of see the trajectory, and also just the stability over there at the time was unrivaled. Working for OGN was just the best gig in the world. You got to watch the best games, you got to be with the best production, and living in Korea was great. So yeah, I think that's one of the things with esports, though, is that if you really want to get involved in it, you just have to make your career the most important thing. I mean, that's it. And you just have to be willing to go anywhere and do anything because it's a global ecosystem, and your casting gig or whatever it is, your playing gig, it might be in a country you've never been to before, but you just have to go because you never know if that opportunity is going to come around again. So, it's not for people who are cowards or for people who aren't flexible. And things happen very fast and sometimes completely out of the blue. And if you're not ready to make the move and be aggressive about making those decisions, you never know if it's going to happen again. So it's not for everybody, for sure.
But it's worked out well. The Montecristo brand is one that is known internationally. There are so many viewers that look up to you and want to emulate your pathway or follow a similar looking path. What would be your recommendation for those who are in the early stages of their career? What's the game plan in the early stages?
Well, I try and do many things. So, it's like I'm not casting so much anymore because I was interested in moving kind of beyond casting into being a producer, doing things behind the scenes and operating FlashPoint in other leagues, just because I feel like I'm at a point in my life and a point in my career where that's the greatest contribution I can make. There's a lot of good casters out there right now in many different games, but my level of experience from, running my own journalism websites, owning professional teams like Renegades, being a professional coach, being a caster, building all these podcasts. Like these are all. I've run so many businesses at this point in time that my experience is much better served being, I think, in an executive position at this point in time. And frankly, like as much as I love casting, it is extremely difficult to keep up the level of expertise that I had as a caster unless I'm spending every moment of my time on that. And I just think there are better things that I could do with my time than that in particular. So, I mean, first off, that based on all the jobs, there could be many different answers to that question. If the answer you're looking for is casting, then I always say this, but people should be getting some level of vocal training. I started doing like stage acting theater when I was 8, and I did it until the time I graduated college. So I've been in about 35 plays, and I have very traditional actor training from when I was a young age. And so a lot of that helps. And if you follow my career, a lot of what I'm known for is being very performative on desks and doing these skits or like crazy things. And that comes from my acting background, but also my vocal control, diction, enunciation, the way I deliver my speech all comes from that as well. And I think it's wonderful if you have great game knowledge, but I'm saying this as an analyst who really enjoys having correct analysis and deep analysis, and I enjoy watching that as well. That's great, but still the most important thing is, are you entertaining and are you easy to listen to? And I think that people don't seek out the vocal training, whether it's from acting or improv or singing or whatever it is. And so you should start with that and making sure that your flow, everything, your language is pleasing, right? And then after that, you should go into like actual, if you want to be a color commentator, if you want to be play by play, you can just do that. That's fine. If you want to be a color commentator, then the knowledge comes as well. And the thing about game knowledge too is that I always say this, but playing the game is often a waste of time. because you don't need mechanics to be an excellent analyst. And so an hour of your time working on your mechanics doesn't do anything for your broadcasting ability when you could be watching more VODs, more film. It's just that people don't like grinding film. And so you really have to, if you want to be an analyst, you really have to love watching VODs. You really, and looking at sets, you just have to love it. Because if you don't, you'll never be the best. That's it. Like, being a great player doesn't mean you'll be a great analyst. And in fact, contributes mostly useless skills when you could be watching film instead.
So these are the foundational skills and good habits that you should get into if you're going to commit to this pathway. Because like you've said, you've been in this career industry for 17 years now. So you really have to enjoy it. You have to be willing to put in this time.
Yeah, I don't know how much I enjoy it anymore. It's kind of annoying.
Is that the classic question? Do you still play video games even though you work in the video game industry? Like,
I mean, I do. I've probably played like 600 games of LoL this year. And I've been playing Rainbow Six the last week, CS. I've been playing a lot of Apex Legends. So I don't know. It's like I do it for fun, but I still watch a ton of esports, right? Because of my job. And, I think what's frustrating for a lot of people about the kind of state of esports right now is that, especially as a lot of people who have been in the scene for 10 or 15 years are getting older, it's increasingly frustrating to many people. And I'm lucky to be in the position that I'm in, where I do have a lot of control. But unfortunately, what ends up happening a lot of the time now is that control is given to people who don't know the industry from the outside, and then they come in and fuck everything up. And so I wish there were more people who were in positions of authority, like I am currently, who can really help guide the industry. Now that we're of an age, in our 30s or 40s, that it's time for us to be in charge.
that's actually a perfect segue into our esports industry conversation. I wanted to start at the very top at the pro level of esports, and then we'll work our way back down. So with that, as you've watched the esports industry evolve over the years, you've seen it grow considerably. But where we are at currently in present day and age with the high level pro leagues, is there still room for growth? Would you consider where we're at right now in the pro scene to be perfection, or are there improvements that we should be making?
I think there are always tons of improvements that can be made. I think a lot of the esports products don't really cater to an esports audience. I think that a lot of the creative decisions and production behind them, those decisions are often very poor and not targeted at. They don't understand the audience that's watching them. I think a great example of one that does is the LEC, which is just wonderful. And many people, I think, would agree with that. I hope FlashPoint, from my perspective, I like FlashPoint a lot, obviously, but I hope we would be considered in that as well. I think Blast is also doing a very good job right now. These are the kind of broadcasts that I admire, and I think are doing a very good job. And you can see that because they're being rewarded with increasing viewership over time. So that's great. I think overall the industry's kind of plateaued a bit. There hasn't been in 2010, 2011, the rise of streaming combined with kind of League of Legends and Dota and CSGO all taking off created a massive increase in esports viewership overall. And we really haven't seen a game come out that has taken esports to the next level in the way that wave of games did. If anything, as new games have come out, it's kind of fractured the viewership, I would say, in certain ways. It's, a lot of the viewership of the big games has gone down, but that's been counterbalanced by, new games coming up and finding their audience. And I don't know what's going to be the next thing, because unfortunately, a lot of the games that come out right now, like Battle Royales, are not very conducive to viewership from an esports perspective. So I think we need some new games that are going to be very viewer friendly, that also have enormous player bases. And that's tough. The market's very saturated.
Mm-hmm. Well, then the internet's at your fingertips. There's so many different things you could be doing. So how do you pick one game and how do you keep the player base there? But I did want to pivot. We've teased Flashpoint a couple of times already in our first 20 minutes. For those who are unfamiliar with Flashpoint, would you mind giving an overview of what Flashpoint is, what makes it unique, and what would you say is your vision moving forwards?
Yeah, I think what's great about Flashpoint is that we're the only tournament-owned or team-owned tournament operator. So while most tournaments or leagues are owned by the developers, or they're owned by independent third parties like Blast or ESL, we have 8 partner teams, including major teams like Cloud9, Dignitas, MIBR, these kind of teams that all put in money in order to found this company, and we work with Faceit as a production partner. And so what's great about FlashPoint is the interests of the teams and the interest of the league are always aligned. There's no, for example, a dev operated league might have an ulterior motive or a conflict of interest based around that they view the league as marketing for the game itself, because they make money off of skins that are sold in the game, for example, that does not typically go to the teams itself. So, maybe their primary goal is not to, in fact, get sponsors or make the league or the tournament, financially viable for the teams. And so I think that the best ecosystems in sports are team-owned leagues, because that way the league's interests are aligned with the team's interests that are aligned with the players' interests, and you can focus on the product being good for the viewer, not necessarily for the player, if that makes sense, the player of the game. The viewer and creating viewership and entertainment is the most important thing, because ultimately it's the number of people who watch the tournament that will get eyes from, will get money from sponsorship. So that's what FlashPoint is. We've operated 3 CSGO tournaments over about the last year and a half so far. We've also operated a Valorant tournament as part of the Ignition series for Riot. So we've done a couple of different games at this point in time. Our last event in May was the EU RMR, which is the major qualifier. So that was very exciting. And we're kind of looking to expand, bring in some more partner teams right now, and then retool ourselves for next year.
A lot of movement very quickly. You guys have really hit the ground running.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's been very fast, but it's been a lot of fun.
Very quick moving. There have been, on the note of companies such as FlashPoint, there's been quite a few startups and grassroots organizations in the esports scene that have been popping up kind of year over year. From your experiences with FlashPoint, were there any challenges or barriers that startups might encounter but not be anticipating?
Oh yeah, the pandemic, that was a fun one. Yeah, I would be aware of global pandemics. That's what I've learned from this.
Yeah, number 1 on the checklist.
Jokes aside, it's hard because we've had such an abnormal experience. Like, I don't really know what to say, because we were hit 3 days into our first event when we had all the players on LAN. We went into lockdown in Los Angeles. And so we've been operating events without players on site ever since then, but we have done talent on site. So it's been really hard. I would say that's been the biggest obstacle. And it basically everything kind of pales in comparison to that. So hopefully this is just a once in a lifetime experience that I never have to go through again.
Yeah, it looks like everyone is starting to open back up country-wise. We're moving forward. Fingers crossed. I hope I didn't jinx anything for anybody. But before the pandemic hit, you had been traveling the world, working, creating content, shoutcasting at events. What were some of the best and most valuable experiences you look back on fondly now that we can't really go anywhere?
I've always liked the League of Legends World Championships were great. A lot of the Overwatch League homestands were really wonderful. I wish we had a chance to do a stadium event for FlashPoint, because I think that would have been very exciting. We actually had one planned for FlashPoint 1 in the same stadium in Sweden that the major is taking place in now, but unfortunately we had to cancel that due to the pandemic. So those kind of events are always good. Mostly I just miss OGN, and now that OGN's shut down, I think we've lost something really special in terms of esports production, because they were the best to ever do it. And it's very disappointing, but those experiences that I had in Korea working with them were very foundational and really formed me, because I learned so much from the producers, from the company, from being over there, because they had 20 years of experience of delivering the best esports content in the world.
Production had a pretty quick pivot from IRL events to virtual events, or what we can still do online. So it was nice to see over the past year and a half that a lot of broadcasts were able to still perform, and we were still able to get that level of entertainment while stuck inside of our own homes.
Yeah, I mean, that was the upside, right? Is that part of the pandemic was that esports viewership went up, and now we're dealing with the other side of that, which is that this summer esports viewership is down. because people don't want to be, now that things are starting to open up again, I think a lot of people want to go outside, and they spent the last 14 months watching esports and they're kind of ready for something else. So I think that's a big part of why we've seen some, lower viewership kind of across the board.
With the rise and fall in viewership over the years, you've also seen the rise and fall of brand sponsorships. Have sponsorships and the way that they're done changed over the years? Is the way that they're carried out and weighted differently on events as time has progressed?
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see how well the numbers from the pandemic sell right now to sponsors for next year, because all those pumped up viewerships are going to be going out to the sponsors, and so it'll be interesting to see if people can get larger deals as a result of that for the next year. I think there are a lot of problems with the way that sponsors are integrated. Again, this goes back to product and production issues, where oftentimes the sponsors are not treated very well. They are kind of logos are just, or names are just kind of slapped on things. But there's not a very meaningful integration there. And I think it's a really bad problem. I think that you can see things that are done really well and appreciate them because they feel like they're adding something to the broadcast. Like, it feels like, oh, this is a cool synergy between this product and this league or this game. And it's hard to do those right. And one of the reasons I also formed a consultancy firm called Theorycraft. And one of the things that we wanted to do when we formed that, and we did do, was do brand consultation to make sure that they were getting integrated in a productive way, and in a way that wouldn't make the fans mad, because I think that's often just really overlooked. It's not wise to do what they do in traditional sports and just slap names on things, because you have to be more creative than that if you want it to actually be effective.
Mhm. The collegiate scene doesn't have the same level of support and infrastructure that the pro scene has, and we see that with sponsorships there as well. When you look at collegiate, where do you think collegiate fits into the overall esports ecosystem? And is there anything stopping it currently from leveling up?
Well, I think first and foremost that the esports ecosystem in collegiate is just never going to be the feeder system for pro esports in the way that college sports are, right? It's, by the time most teams are perfectly pro teams are perfectly capable of scouting kids by the time they're 15 or 16 years old. Most teams are going to want them to begin playing professionally by the time they're 17 or 18, to kind of maximize that window in their career. And so for me, the focus on collegiate esports and how it fits into the broader ecosystem should be that it is a tool for educating professional players once they retire. So at the end of their career, they can go play on a collegiate team, get a scholarship, get an educational background that will help them re-enter the esports space with a degree, whether that's in accounting or graphic design or production. And I think what collegiate esports is the opportunity to hone all of those skills, sports management, whatever it is. So for me, it's not about the players. It's about everyone surrounding the players on the broadcasts and the entire ecosystem, because that's what feeds into the actual industry. And that's where I think the jobs are. And that's where people look to hire. And I think also the professional players, it will be very good for them to, with all their experience in the scene, get more practical skills and then bring their esports experience back into the professional world with them. We've seen that in Korea quite a bit. Where players will kind of go to the military and then they'll come back and rejoin teams as managers or other positions. And so for me, that's the most important thing about collegiate esports, because if you're being realistic, it's not going to be a feeder for the professional scene for players, but it can be a feeder for the entire industry for college educated professionals.
And we love to see some education in the scene for sure. There is always the students who say, Mom, Dad, I want to go to school and learn esports. And parents are like, I'm not quite sure what you mean. But with the pandemic hitting, we have seen for sure a rise in esports programming at the collegiate level. So aside from the collegiate uptake for esports, are there any other trends that you've seen developing over the years or even pre-COVID that you're happy to see are developing that bring good to the scene? Whether this be collegiate or pro, it could be open-ended.
I mean, we're pretty good at kicking out scumbags now, so that's encouraging. Because I mean, and frankly, like this, the scene was rife with abuse at certain points in time. It's not even like it's well known, it's well documented. Whether it was people encouraging match fixing or taking advantage of professional players, or it's been horrible. Frankly, there's really horrible shit. People go to jail for match fixing or gambling scandals. So yeah, I think as the scene grows, it's harder. Fortunately, it's harder to get away with that, and also because there are now people with very very large megaphones, like people like Richard Lewis, who can get rid of them, which is super nice. Investigative journalism across the board, I think, has certainly leveled up. So I think that's probably been the best thing is it's, frankly, way safer now than it used to be. And it's a lot harder to get abused by unscrupulous individuals. It's been nice in some ways to have it get bigger. Like I never thought I would get a full-time job in esports. I was just doing it because I loved it. Right. From when I started working in esports to when I got a full-time job was 8 years. So it wasn't like, oh, I thought this was going to be a career. I truly did not. I just really loved it. So I kept doing it and organizing my own events and building everything around that. So for me, it's exciting that there are opportunities for people. And even my first full-time job, I was getting paid when I went to Korea. I was working in a law firm in New York, and I took a massive pay cut. I think I was getting paid like the equivalent of $35,000 or $40,000 a year to move to Korea, which, in Korea, it's lower cost of living. So, but, I was still poor. I was still poor. So the fact that, entry level jobs are way better now. And like, even as a starting caster, you'd get paid a lot more than that. It's good. So it's nice to see that it can be a long-term career for people these days.
For students or individuals who are new to the scene who want to move into this as a full-time career or even get their feet wet, a lot of on-air talent have their own unique personality, brand, style while they're on air. How do you decide what yours is going to be, or how do you find what yours is going to be?
Um, to me, I don't know how to say this. Like, there's not a lot of difference between me on air and me normally. So I guess for me, it was mostly just working on myself as a person that then translated to that. I mean, I'm very blunt, just in conversation. I'm very direct. I like to make jokes or to have a good time with the esport. Like I genuinely have fun when I'm casting it. Joe and I always had like great synergy. Like Joe and I are pretty much the same people in real life as we are in the broadcasts. Maybe it's like amped up a little bit for entertainment value, right? Like maybe your takes are just a little hotter, just so the fans can have fun. But I guess with me, what you see is what you get. So my advice would be travel the world, put yourself in difficult situations so that you understand better who you are and you're more confident in your own personality. That way you just don't have to fake it, and it's way easier.
So be uncomfortable. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. I mean, you'll never know who you are until you're in fucking weird situations. Like a life of safety is not going to result in a confident individual most of the time.
And being a confident individual, do you or have you ever had stage fright before going live? If you do, how do
No.
you drown out those pre-show nerves? Never?
Like I said, I started acting when I was 8. So
Yeah.
like basically my entire life, I have been performing live in front of people, and I've been doing it for hours at a time without a script or with the script memorized in a live play. So live theater is really the best way, I think, to get into casting, because casting is hours and hours and hours of off the cuff live commentary where you can't make any mistakes, or if you do make a mistake, it's very obvious and you have to go back and correct it. And that's part of the charm too, is like fucking up and owning it. But it's a very different skill. And so I guess I was never really flustered by that because I've always been performing. And for the most part, there were on an average day, there were fewer people in the audience that I could see than a lot of the stage productions I did. Right, these studios hold 200 or 300 people, but I've performed in front of more than that live. And so on a day-to-day basis, like you can't see the 100,000 people that are watching the game, right? So that's not intimidating at all, really. And then the stadium events, like I guess I was so well prepared that, and so I would say confident in my knowledge of the game and of the players and the storylines and my own abilities that it really wasn't. It was just fun. It's super fun to have a crowd like reacting to you. That's why I love trolling them, or like I love making crowds mad and hate me. It's incredibly entertaining.
To get that reaction, did the stage performance also help you find your rhythm while you were casting? And by rhythm, I mean the back and forth banter, commentary, improv, dealing with awkward silences. It sounds like casting is a delicate balance. How do you do that?
I think it's just, again, it's been my esports career is something that's it feels like a very fortuitous uh, kind of aggregation of my abilities, because I grew up acting. I grew up being a huge fan of video games, and I grew up as a sports fan. And I have a degree in literature, which my emphasis was really oral tradition, storytelling, and mythology. And I'm very familiar with how to structure narratives in mythology, and I've done apprenticeships for oral tradition storytelling. And it just, everything I've done in my life feels like it has informed my ability to be in esports. So I guess it's just like kind of finding a very good place for me in terms of my own interests and other kind of academic concerns that I have previously pursued. So
So with
it's not, I guess to say it's not, it wasn't really conscious. It's just that I happen to have these skills.
You possess a very unique set of skills, I think is the quote, but it's so true to life for you. You've gone through so many different things, both inside and especially the skills that you've gained outside of esports transitioned into helping your esports related skills. So many people don't realize that esports is multidisciplinary. There's so many things that you can learn external to esports and then bring it in and have that provide value to you. Was there anything else aside from
Yeah,
the
no, and
stage
I think
performance?
no, I think you can see this in other casters too. Like, for example, Dracos with the LEC. He's a play-by-play commentator there, but his background in like hip hop and music production means that he's doing all these like rap videos on LEC that are just fabulous. I can't do that, but he's figured out a way to take his skills and integrate them into the broadcast in a way that only he can do, which is just awesome. Right. And I think that's the thing about casting too, is that it's not just an ability to talk about the game. It's how many of your own other unique skills can you bring into that? Like, part of Doa's charm is that he's a giant like nerd, and he knows he's got a great mind for referential humor to like pop culture. And I don't have that, right? But he uses it very well.
It goes back to what you said about be entertaining. Just do what you think would be a good you to put forward. And there's so many different ways that you can entertain with you. It's a lot of the on-screen performances. There's the on-screen hip hop too. So there's so many different ways that you can go about it. Find out what's fun. What can you bring to the table?
Yeah,
I
yeah,
did
exactly.
want to.
And I think that's the key too. And like you say, esports is very multidisciplinary. And what's great about esports is there really isn't a lot of structure at any level. So it's mostly the people who succeed are the ones who can come into an organization, um, and do the job you're hired for. But there's a lot of flexibility. So if you find something that you can do to really, there's just freedom. There's freedom to go do things that you're interested in. And a lot of the people that have grown in this industry, I think, have used the opportunity of getting into the industry to then mold their career to what they want to do. And so if you are assertive and you put yourself out there, most people will be happy to let you just kind of do your own thing and add to the product and the experience in whatever way you can.
And I wanted to sneak in one more question before we move on to the Q&A. We already have quite a few piling up, but before we move on to those, do people, when they first come into esports, they may have this idea that they have to silo themselves into one role. For example, casting. If I come into the industry, I have to be a caster. I'm going to be a caster for the entire career journey that I have. But you've proven that's not the case. You see what you want. You move from role to role where you think you can provide the most value. What advice would you have for people who don't really know where they want to go and might think that it has to be one particular thing?
I don't know. I'm an incredibly ambitious person, and I get bored. So when I start getting bored, I start trying to figure out new things that I can do or new skills that I can learn. So I think the best advice is just to tell people what you want. I would not be commissioner of FlashPoint right now if I hadn't gone to a bunch of the team owners without even knowing they were working on this project, right? And basically said, hey, I'm interested in moving my career, in a more like creative control, moving more away from casting and towards being more of a producer or being a commissioner. And I think a bunch of the team owners that I talked to heard me because I've known them for years. And they said, oh, well, if Monty's interested in doing this, we just happen to be making this Counter-Strike league and we think he's the best fit for this. So I, that was the best thing I did, was without even knowing about this, just saying like, this is what I want, and talking to people. And if you are vocal about that, I think you can find those opportunities, because like I said, within the industry, there's always room for people to grow, and there's a lot of freedom as new projects come along. And I think you can kind of will that into reality as long as you are making your desires known to other people. So I would just be vocal about it, about what you want.
What's the worst that's going to happen? Somebody says no, and then you move on to the next one.
Well, sometimes you get fired, but
okay, so maybe it's not the worst at all.
But in all seriousness, there is that risk, right? Because if your current employer thinks that you don't want to do your job anymore, then there are downsides to that. But I run a very high risk life, so I personally think that it's better for me to do things my way. But I think a lot of people probably would have already been broken by what I've gone through. Not a lot of people want to go to war with multi-billion-dollar companies and get into giant fights, and it's exhausting. But I think it's necessary as well, because I've improved a lot of conditions by what I've done. Even if it wasn't for me, definitely it helps caster rates across the entire industry. Some of the things that I've done.
That ties very well into our first audience question, which is, how would you describe your major work environments, example, Riot, Korea, Owl, FlashPoint, and your transition from broadcast talent to tournament organizer?
So I never worked for Riot Korea, to be clear. I worked for OGN. This was in fact, one of the reasons why I wanted to move to Overwatch League was the imminent takeover of the Korean League of Legends scene by Riot Korea. And I don't want to work for Riot. Definitely not. And so working for OGN was great. I think the thing about OGN that we always said with casters is that it was always sink or swim, because we were a piggyback broadcast onto the Korean stream. The amount of resources that the European and North American casters got in terms of people helping them with research, stats, like everything, was considerable compared to us. It's like, you show up for the broadcast, you get your makeup on, and if you suck, you just get fired, and there's no help, virtually no help. So I do well in those environments because I'm very self-motivated. So I can do my own research, and I just worked my ass off, watching all these games around the world, becoming kind of a global expert. So not only a Korean expert, but an expert on many of the scenes. I was more involved in all the scenes around the world than any other caster at the time, through my podcasts and my coaching of CLG and everything like that, and my owning of Renegades. So that was a very interesting experience. But for the most part, I was just left to my own devices. Like, they didn't expect me to go into the office or any of that bullshit. It's just like I did my work. I did it very well. I went above and beyond, and So that's where it was. For Overwatch League, I was much more involved with, especially in the early stages with the design of the league. I was consulting with a lot of the teams, like the new team owners who were coming on, who needed to know how to build an esports team, because I was at the time one of the very few people who had owned a professional team who is not currently involved in a professional team. So I could do consulting like that, talk about format, creative direction, all of this stuff. That waned in time, especially after Nate Nanzer, the commissioner who hired me, left and went to Epic. And it was at that time when Nate left that, I knew that Overwatch League was probably not going to go in a very good place. And a lot of my ability to influence the decisions at the league had gone. And so that's when I started talking to these other team owners about my career, my development, and especially Cloud9 was very accommodating. And they were kind of leading the charge on creating FlashPoint. And so I'm very grateful to them for that opportunity. And with FlashPoint, I run a very small team. I work a lot with Faceit, but it's nice to have the trust of the team owners, and I think we have.
The next question is also about FlashPoint, actually. Can you describe the process of turning FlashPoint from a franchise league to a one-off RMR event?
Yeah. Well, we had a lot of issues because of the pandemic and our partner teams fielding rosters, considering most of their facilities were in North America and visas were stalled. And so as our teams are looking on how to proceed with FlashPoint, and as we're hopefully going to get some more teams involved in the future, we wanted to keep the brand up. And so we applied to do the RMR event for Europe, because some of our partner teams are still based out of there. And we ended up getting it awarded and designing a format in order to fit in the window that we were provided. So the format is something that Thorne and I designed, and we ended up running the event. We had some hiccups, obviously, on the tech side that were unfortunate, but not much could have been done about them. And I think the decisions that were made were the right ones in the end. And so we had great viewership, highest of any FlashPoint yet. A very exciting event overall. We ran it with talent out of the LA studios, and the players were playing remotely in Europe. So it was definitely different. It was definitely different than the first two FlashPoints, and I hope that we can get back to the original FlashPoint format, because I think it's important to have our partner teams and to field a competition that is our own, that is not part of the Valve circuit, because there are fewer restrictions. Valve circuit is great, but it's Valve circuit at the end of the day. I want to run my circuit, not theirs.
Yeah, more freedoms, right? Something that you guys have built and you own. This next question is pulling on your experiences in the earlier days. What is the difference of first-gen esports, StarCraft 2 and early League of Legends, versus the current landscape, and what does each do better than the other?
I'm sorry, I don't understand the beginning of the question. What's the comparison?
Early first-generation esports,
Yep.
they've listed StarCraft 2 and early League of Legends versus the current landscape, which is
Oh boy,
quite a few different games.
we have very different definitions of early esports, I see. Because like my early esports would be like Brood War at 1.6 and Quake, not StarCraft 2 and League of Legends. I would consider those like mid, kind of in the timeline, like halfway through, as opposed to modern. But to answer the question, like I think just so much of it has been about leveling up the West, because Korea never really needed any help. They were already there by the time that StarCraft 2 and League of Legends, whether it was GOM TV or whether it was OGN, or NBC Game at the time. Well, that was earlier. That was Brood War, but they were already there, right? So for the most part, the rise of StarCraft 2 and the rise of League of Legends has been the improvement of Western esports in North America, especially, but also in Europe, because ESL was already in Europe, and they weren't great at the time. And MLG was in the States, and like it was good. ESL and MLG were good for the eras, but they weren't at the level of like Korean television production, right? So I think what the best thing is that the West caught up and like started making really good stuff, and provided the infrastructure that allowed esports to grow and get the sponsors that we have today. And I think that the biggest factor in that is Riot. As much as I don't like certain things that Riot has done, there is no taking away the fact that Riot spent more money. They lost money to level up the sports scene and infrastructure and production value, because you could not have made money given the production value that they had at the time. And so, well, who knows if they lost money? It could have been a very successful marketing exercise that they made a lot of money, but we can't know that. But they made the investment, and I think that was very important from Riot. So even though I don't always agree with everything that they've done, you can never fault them for not putting in the resources and supporting esports, because they have.
This next one's a little bit more fun and lighthearted, I would say. How has the entire process of a Rainbow Six major in Mexico been, especially with the COVID-19 pandemic ongoing? Are these things you take into consideration when deciding what events you commit to?
So I'm a very adventurous traveler overall. I go to places all over the world and go into the middle of nowhere and put myself in questionably safe situations. And Mexico is very nice, so it's none of those things. Like, you know, my idea of a vacation is like, I go to Cambodia and go to the middle of the Cardamom Mountains and hike around in the jungle, or I climbed Kilimanjaro a few years ago. So like, my standards are, I like traveling, and it doesn't really phase me. So being in Mexico City in a super nice hotel here is not bad. It's very nice. Like, the food's great. And especially during the pandemic, I've been vaccinated since before FlashPoint 3. So basically the earliest time I was able to. So is my personal concern about getting COVID like not a lot? No, it's not. And even if I get it, I'm pretty confident that I would be fine. So I guess that level of danger doesn't really factor in. And the other thing too is Faceit is producing this, and just like we did with Flashpoint 2 with Faceit in London, we're in a bubble. So what happens is everybody arrives here at this hotel. We literally have the entire hotel rented out. You come in, you take a COVID test, you go to your room, you don't come out until you test negative, and then nobody else is allowed into the building. So like, it's pretty safe, all things considered, right? So no, I'm not particularly concerned, and it's very nice here so far. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, nice time to travel, and everything's being handled very safely. The next question piggybacks off of the COVID-19 question. Do you think the professional esports scene has handled the COVID-19 pandemic well? And what are some examples that really embraced online play, some examples of leagues that really embraced online play, and some that did not?
I think Blast really probably did some of the best work during the pandemic. I think us and Blast, and for different reasons. I think Blast had a really excellent live experience in terms of making sure that all the player cams, like reaction cams, everything was really good in Blast, and they had a bunch of content. What we did with the pandemic was we actually sent out local camera crews to 8 different countries during Flashpoint 2, so that we could do interviews with the players outside. And we were really the only tournament operator in the world that was getting all of this live interview footage with players. So we would just send a camera crew there. They'd all be masked up. If the player wanted to do it outside, we just do it outside. And so we were getting much, much better like documentary and feature content than anyone else during the pandemic. So we were pretty happy with that. Faceit did a really good job of doing that. But yeah, it's been tough. Like, it's been really tough. We did all of our events with talent on site, with very thorough cleaning and keeping the talent away from production and kind of isolated. So, we didn't have a whole lot of issues. We did at the end of London, unfortunately, have an issue, but for the most part, we ran 3 events during this pandemic, and with the help of Faceit, did pretty well overall.
Very much so, and it's going to keep on growing, right, Christopher? Keep on moving.
Hopefully. Hopefully. I think the pandemic was very challenging, but there were some really good things that came out of it too, which is that we have remote production capabilities in a way that we just didn't possess before. And I think this is good, because as much as fans might not want to hear this, being able to run preliminary phases of a tournament online is significantly cheaper. And if we can provide a good experience that it still incorporates player reactions, and it's not only that it's cheaper, it's that, especially in Counter-Strike, some of these pro players were traveling 250 days or more a year, and that burns you out. and so are the casters and a lot of the production as well. And a lot of the players, they don't want to return to that lifestyle because it's shit, and you can't have a family and you can't live like a normal human being. And so I think that we will see kind of more online play in the future, but at least what we've learned from this production, from the production side, is going to make it a better experience for fans, and it'll be better for the ecosystem because it's not as expensive. We'll still have great LAN events and LAN finals and everything like that, LAN playoffs, but I think some events probably are not going to go back to exclusively LAN play because of that, and because the players I also just don't think are interested in returning to that lifestyle anytime soon.
For players, we talked earlier about the pro scene and the collegiate college university scene, but we missed out on high school. So we do have a question here regarding the high school scene. Do you believe there's a point where the high school esports scene will be considered as important as regular athletics in terms of scouting for professional teams or even collegiate play?
Well, for professional play, actually, in some ways, I would say the high school scene is much more important than the collegiate scene for players, right? Because the players are infinitely more likely to be scouted out of high school than they are to be scouted out of a college. Certainly, there will be some collegiate players that are scouted, but most of the time, it's going to be out of high school. And I think it's very, very important to develop those programs because people need to understand what a coaching system is when they're 14 years old, right? And the advantage is that of traditional athletics is that you have these kids getting coached from a very young age. They understand how to behave in a team. I think a lot of the behavioral problems that you see with people in ranked ladders, for example, would be helped significantly by having these people coached in a more professional environment. Also, I just think it's better for if these kids are going to be playing games, which they are anyway, it's better for them to treat it with a higher level of discipline by having coaches and having it be a more structured activity that they can participate in, just like traditional sports. So I think it's really important. I think it's very, very important. And I hope we see more of it, especially now that I have a kid. That's what I would much rather have him go to, after school, go to a place to get trained in esports and to get coached and have teammates than like flaming people on the ladder by himself. Right.
That team experience is much more productive.
Yeah.
We've
And
got
I
time.
think it's just, it professionalizes it in a lot of ways. And I think that there's a lot of talk. And to be clear, this is not an esports problem. Esports is definitively the professional scene. That's like calling what happens on a pickup basketball court in New York City the NBA, right? This guy calling you an asshole at your local basketball court is not an NBA problem, right? But there are a lot of problems with people being shitty to each other in the competitive ladder. And I think a lot of that would lessen if we were training kids from a younger age to be more competitive and to have certain like professional conduct, right?
Catching it young while we still can. I'm going to try to sneak in one last question for you, Christopher, from the audience. What does everyone wanting live events mean for FlashPoint? Is FlashPoint planning to lean into the demand for live events?
So it was never FlashPoint's intention, I will say, to have live. So there's two different questions here. I don't understand what it is, but I'll answer both of them. If by live events you mean players on LAN, yes, we will. We will continue to do that. Obviously, I don't like having audience for the initial stages of a tournament because it doesn't provide a lot in terms of atmosphere. You're never going to get like 1,000 people there and like 200 people showing up to your studio. The hassle of having them there makes it harder to make shoulder content or to make the production more dynamic for the vast majority of the audience, which is like, 1,000 times that online. So for me, if we're talking about live viewing, I don't think we'll ever have a live audience on group stage games or earlier games in the tournament. Now, will we have live audiences for later playoff matches? And certainly, do we want to run stadium events for the finals? Yes, absolutely. That was always the intention, and I hope we were able to get back to that as the pandemic hopefully kind of eases up.
It sounds like everyone's very excited to see things be opening back up and more content to be coming out. But that is all that we
Yeah.
have time for today. Thank you so much, Christopher, for joining us here today
But
at the
I want the players back.
Slowly but surely, we're kicking things off with Mexico, eh, Christopher?
Yeah, and we got the players here, so I was very excited to see the players here, and you should watch the Rainbow Six Major starting tomorrow, which should be a lot of fun. And it's the first time I've been around players since everything shut down in Flashpoint 1 in March. So I'm psyched about that. I'm psyched to have players back at LAN.
It's the start of the normal, start of the return to the normal. Do you have any closing thoughts for us, Christopher, as we say goodbye to everyone at the end of our Collegiate Rising back to school?
Nope. Thanks a lot for your questions. Really appreciate this. Hopefully, I give you some insider answers. Hopefully, you guys will watch Flashpoint in the future.
And one last thank you to MSI, Red Bull, Twitch Student, and Corsair for helping all of this happen. Thank you everyone so much for tuning in to talk with Christopher and I. And Christopher, thank you so much for your time. It was great to chat with you over the last hour. Thanks again, everyone, and have a
Thank you
great
very
evening.
much for your time as well.